On today's episode of Wangel's Workshop, I'll be making a Tanto knife. On this channel, I tell the story behind various knife builds. If this sounds like something that'll interest you, please consider subscribing. Up until now, I'd never made a Tanto before, so when my friend Jay asked me to make him a Tanto, I was pretty excited about it. Now, one of the main questions that I asked him, I actually had a whole ton of questions to ask him, but one of the main questions I asked him was, do you want it to be more of a traditional style Japanese Tanto, or do you want it to be more modern? And he said, put whatever spin on it you want. So I decided to go with a more modern, almost like EDC Tanto, and so that's what we're making. Now, once I had the bar stock cut the length, I'll head over to the 2x72 grinder to profile the knife. Now, since this grinder is still new to my shop and I'm super excited about having it, I'm going to talk about it one more time. It's the Revolution grinder. It's designed by Brian from Housework. I'm not sponsored by this or anything, but it's a really awesome grinder, and if you head over to the Housework YouTube channel, you can find out all about it and its capabilities. It's a pack that you would order and you'd have to build it yourself, but it really is a spectacular grinder. Now, prior to getting this grinder, I had ground my bevels, for one using files, and then for two mostly using a 4x36 grinder that's probably for woodworking and not for metalwork. Now, ever since I picked up this grinder as well as a few other items in the shop, I've gone from making one knife every, roughly 2 weeks to making one knife every 2 to 3 days. Now, part of this is due to increase in skill and shop organization, but part of it really is just due to having a 2x72 grinder. I'm not having to do as much hand sanding. The bevels grind faster. They grind more even. Things just kind of flow more smoothly ever since I got this thing. Now, getting back to the build, I've applied layout fluid and marked out the lines for my bevels. And now I'm marking out where the knife scales will be, as well as the pinholes and the weight reduction holes. I'm going to go ahead and center punch these and then head over to the drill press to get them drilled out. Now, as much as it pains me to admit this, or even talk about it for that matter, I like to tell you guys the full story behind the build and be transparent when things go wrong, because in the shop, things do not always go perfectly. Now, after making roughly 30 knives since starting knife making, this is the first knife that I've totally screwed up and had to start over. So after doing the pinholes and the weight reduction holes, I went to skeletonize the handle. And in doing so, I cut too close to the edge of the handle. This compromised the structural integrity of the tang, and I had to start over from scratch. So as you see me grinding this knife on the belt sander, this is the second knife that I've profiled and drilled out the pinholes and weight reduction holes. Now, as I moved on to the second bevels of the knife, I did have quite a bit of difficulty with this, so I may need to do a little bit of research on how to make this easier, or possibly next time I may grind these first and then do the main bevels second. Now, despite having some difficulty grinding the bevels, I was able to get them where I was pretty happy. I would also like to point out that I put some fullers in the knife scales instead of trying to skeletonize them this time, and that's just to reduce some weight. Now here I'm heating up some chain that I will use to heat the oil, as it allows for a faster and better quench when the oil is heated. Now, since this is 1084 high carbon steel, the heat treat is fairly straightforward. I'll take it a couple shades beyond non-magnetic, and then I'll go ahead and quench it. Now, I did an edge quench again because I'm still trying to experiment and see how much of a hamon I can pull out of a knife just by doing an edge quench. And it actually did pull a pretty cool one out. And now after the quench, it will go in for 2 temper cycles of 2 hours at 400 degrees. Now for the scales, I'll be using some green canvas micarta with black and white G10 liners. Once the pinholes are drilled in the scales, I will head over to the router table to use a flush trim bit to make them flush to the knife. Now for the pre-acid wash finish, I brought the flats and the main bevel up to 400 grit and then used surface conditioning belts. And then I hand sanded the bevel at the tip. Now after cleaning the knife extremely good, I will put it in ferric chloride to etch the blade before stonewashing it. So now here's the final result of the acid etch and the stone wash. And as you can see, it left a pretty cool hamon or quench line, whatever you want to call it. Now I'll go ahead and glue the scales to the knife using some West Systems G-Flex 2-part epoxy. Now I'll grind the brass pins down flush with the scales, being careful not to overheat them using a very low grit belt and wetting them often. And then I'll head back over to the router table to use a roundover bit to start the process of shaping the scales. And then I'll head back over to the grinder to give the scales a slight Coke bottle shape. Now with the scales finished, it's time to sharpen the blade. I'll start off on my belt sander at about 150 grit and I'll create an even burr on both sides of the knife and on both bevels in this case. all the way down, and then I'll move up to 400 grit on the belt sander. I'll follow that up by using a honing rod to remove the burr, and then finish sharpening on a strop. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. It's such a small thing for you, but it really helps me out, and as the channel grows, I'll be able to produce more content and upload more often. If you want to see some of the behind the scenes or like things that are going on in between videos that I post, you could follow me on Instagram. It's also Wengel's Workshop. And if you want to be notified when I upload new videos, hit the notification bell. And as always, thank you for watching.